The December wind howled through Toronto's financial district, carrying with it the scent of impending snow and the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby street vendor. Ryan Thompson stood motionless before the Maple Leaf Hotel's brass-framed windows, his reflection a ghostly overlay on the bustling street beyond. At 45, the silver streaks in his dark hair seemed more pronounced under the warm glow of the Christmas lights adorning the hotel's facade. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the coarse texture of strands that had gone gray far too quickly in recent years. Inside the hotel's grand ballroom, the air hummed with the overlapping conversations of Toronto's medical elite, his wife Melissa's world. The crystal chandeliers cast a soft, golden light over the gathering, their prisms creating tiny rainbows that danced across the polished marble floor. Ryan's fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass, the Cabernet within dark and brooding, much like his mood. And then, just as his heart stopped, I knew we had mere seconds to act. Melissa's voice carried across the room, slicing through the ambient chatter like a scalpel. Ryan turned, his gaze drawn inexorably to his wife. She stood in the center of a rapt circle of listeners, fellow surgeons, hospital administrators, and their spouses, her hands gesturing animatedly as she recounted her latest medical triumph. Melissa's emerald evening gown caught the light, the sequins shimmering like scales on a mermaid's tail. Her auburn hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the graceful curve of her neck. She was radiant, confident, entirely in her element. Ryan watched as she paused for dramatic effect, her audience leaning in unconsciously, hanging on her every word. He took another sip of wine, the rich flavor barely registering on his palate. It was his third glass of the evening, but who was counting? Certainly not Melissa. She'd been too engrossed in her adoring crowd to notice his growing discomfort, his increasing isolation in this room full of people. 20 years of marriage had taught Ryan patience. He'd grown accustomed to playing the supportive spouse, to standing in the shadows while Melissa basked in the limelight. But lately, that well of patience had run dry, leaving behind a parched landscape of resentment and unmet needs. His architecture firm had just landed their biggest project to date, a sustainable community center that could revolutionize urban planning in the city. It was the kind of project he'd dreamed about since his days as an idealistic architecture student, sketching grand designs on napkins in late-night diners. Not that Melissa had noticed his excitement. When he'd tried to share the news over breakfast that morning, she'd been too busy reviewing patient files to listen, her eyes never leaving the tablet screen as she absent-mindedly stirred her cooling coffee. "Ryan, darling." Melissa's voice cut through his brooding thoughts, sharp and sudden as a thunderclap. "Come tell everyone about your little building project." Little building project. The words stung like a physical blow, each syllable a tiny dagger piercing his professional pride. Ryan felt a muscle twitch in his jaw as he forced a smile, his feet carrying him towards the group on autopilot. The faces turned to him were politely interested, but he could see the hunger in their eyes to return to Melissa's medical marvels. As he opened his mouth to speak, Ryan felt something shift inside him. A dam breaking, years of pent-up frustration suddenly surging forth. The polite words he'd prepared evaporated, replaced by something raw and honest and long overdue. "Actually," Ryan said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "it's a $50 million development that could change how we approach community spaces in Toronto." He was surprised by the tremor in his voice, the barely contained emotion threatening to spill over. "But you wouldn't know that, would you, Melissa? You haven't asked about my work in months." The crystal chandelier above seemed to dim, casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled guests. All eyes turned toward them, conversations dying mid-sentence as the tension in the air became palpable. Melissa's perfect smile faltered, her composure cracking for the first time that evening. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process this sudden deviation from the script. "Ryan, this isn't the time," she began, her voice low and warning. But the floodgates had opened, and Ryan found he couldn't stop the torrent of words even if he wanted to. "When is the time?" The question erupted from deep within, years of suppressed frustration giving it a force that surprised even him. "Between your surgeries, your conferences, your charity boards. When exactly do I get to exist in this marriage? The room fell silent, the background music fading away as if someone had pulled the plug. Even the waitstaff froze, trays of hors d'oeuvres suspended in midair. Melissa stood frozen, her champagne glass tilted precariously, the bubbles rising to the surface, the only movement in her suddenly still form. For the first time in years, she really looked at him, not just through him or around him, but at him. Ryan saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the first stirrings of guilt. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the man she had slowly but surely been overlooking for years. "I'm tired of being your accessory," Ryan continued, his voice breaking slightly. He could feel the eyes of the room upon him, but he focused solely on Melissa. "I'm tired of my dreams being little projects, while yours shape the world. I love that you save lives, Melissa. I've always been proud of your work. But I'm drowning here, and you don't even notice." Melissa's hand trembled, sending ripples across the surface of her champagne. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words, a rarity for the usually eloquent surgeon. The silence stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second. Ryan could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel a bead of sweat tracing a path down his back beneath his tailored suit jacket. He waited for Melissa to say something, anything, to acknowledge the truth he'd just laid bare before her and their peers. Instead, she turned to the stunned crowd, her professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, her voice only slightly strained. "Perhaps we should move on to the silent auction portion of the evening?" The spell broken. The room erupted into a flurry of awkward movement. Guests hurried to disperse, murmuring in hushed tones, stealing glances at the couple who stood like statues amidst the flow of bodies. Ryan felt a hollow ache spread through his chest. Even now, faced with the raw truth of their failing marriage, Melissa chose to deflect, to maintain appearances rather than confront the reality of what was happening between them. He turned on his heel, unable to bear the pitying looks and whispered speculations any longer. As he strode towards the exit, he caught fragments of conversations. "I always thought they were so happy. Did you see her face? I've never seen Dr. Thompson caught off guard like that. Poor Ryan, always in her shadow." The cool night air hit him like a slap as he burst through the hotel's revolving doors. Ryan gulped it down, feeling lightheaded from the adrenaline and wine. He loosened his bow tie, which suddenly felt like it was choking him. Where to go now? He couldn't face going home to their empty house. Couldn't bear the thought of sitting in silence, waiting for Melissa to return and inevitably brush off what had just happened. As if summoned by his thoughts, he heard the click of high heels on marble behind him. "Ryan, wait," Melissa called, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. He turned to face her, watching as she hurried down the steps, her gown billowing around her legs in the December wind. She stopped a few feet away, uncertainty written across her features. "We should talk," she said softly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "But not here. Let's go home." Ryan nodded, too drained to argue. As they walked to the valet stand in silence, he wondered if this was the beginning of the end, or if maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of something new. The drive home loomed before them, promising a conversation long overdue, and a future uncertain. The drive home was enveloped in a thick, uncomfortable silence. Snowflakes began to fall, coating Toronto's streets in a deceptive blanket of peace that belied the turmoil within the car. Ryan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, the leather creaking under his grip. Beside him, Melissa stared out the passenger window, her usual confidence replaced by something he hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. The rhythmic swish of the wipers seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet car, each sweep emphasizing the growing distance between them. Ryan's mind raced, replaying the scene at the hotel over and over. Had he gone too far? The weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on both of them. As they turned onto their street in Rosedale, the grand houses loomed like silent sentinels, their windows dark and uninviting. Christmas lights twinkled on neatly manicured lawns, a jarring contrast to the somber mood in the car. Ryan pulled into their driveway, the crunch of tires on snow seeming to echo in the stillness of the night. For a moment, neither of them moved. The engine ticked as it cooled, the sound emphasizing the passage of time. Finally, Melissa reached for the door handle, pausing as her fingers touched the cold metal. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the house felt cavernous and foreign. Ryan moved on autopilot, hanging up his coat and loosening his tie. The familiar surroundings seemed to mock him. Photos of happier times lining the hallway, a reminder of what they once were. He could hear Melissa's heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she made her way to the living room. Ryan followed, pausing in the doorway. Melissa had sunken onto their leather sofa, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled paint. She looked small and lost, a far cry from the confident surgeon who had commanded the room just hours ago. The realization hit Ryan like a physical blow. He wasn't the only one struggling. "I didn't realize," Melissa whispered, breaking the silence. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "When did we become this?" Ryan moved to the fireplace, running his fingers along the mantel where photos chronicled their journey. Medical school graduation, their wedding, housewarming. Each image a snapshot of dreams shared and promises made. "Gradually," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "So gradually I barely noticed until I couldn't breathe anymore." Melissa's eyes welled with tears, one escaping to trace a path down her cheek. "I remember when we used to dream together," she said, her voice thick. "You'd sketch buildings on napkins, and I'd plan where the medical clinics would go." She paused, wiping her eyes carefully, mindful of her makeup even now. "What happened to those people, Ryan? Where did we lose them?" "They got lost in the race to the top," Ryan said softly, turning to face her. "One of them did, anyway. The other just tried to keep up." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Melissa flinched as if the words had physically struck her. "I never meant to leave you behind," she said, her voice barely audible. "I got so caught up in proving myself, in being the best." Ryan moved to sit beside her on the sofa, careful to maintain a small distance. "I know," he said. "And I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Melissa. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners. We stopped seeing each other." Melissa nodded, twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since the day he'd placed it there. "Can we find our way back?" she asked, meeting his gaze. The vulnerability in her eyes was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Ryan reached out, covering her hand with his own. The simple touch felt monumental after so much distance. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want to try. If you do." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of neglect and misunderstanding between them. But there was also a glimmer of something else, the faint stirring of hope, of possibility. As the clock on the mantel chimed midnight, marking the start of a new day, Ryan and Melissa faced each other, ready to begin the hard work of rebuilding what they had lost. The next morning dawned cold and clear, sunlight glinting off the fresh snow that blanketed their backyard. Ryan woke to an unfamiliar sound, movement in the kitchen. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and he braced himself for whatever the day might bring. Following the aroma of coffee, he made his way downstairs. The sight that greeted him in the kitchen stopped him in his tracks. Melissa, still in her silk pajamas, hair mussed from sleep, stood at the stove, attempting to make pancakes. A thin layer of flour dusted her cheeks, and wisps of smoke rose from what appeared to be a failed first attempt in the sink. "I can't remember the last time I cooked," she admitted, not turning around. Her voice carried a note of frustration tinged with something else, determination, perhaps. "I used to make you breakfast every Sunday." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret and unspoken apologies. Ryan moved beside her, gently taking the spatula from her hand. "Here, let me help," he offered. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment, neither moved. The simple touch sent a jolt through him, a reminder of the connection they once shared so easily. You know, he said, focusing on flipping a slightly lopsided pancake. The community center project has a medical wing that needs planning. He kept his tone casual, but his heart raced at the tentative olive branch he was extending. Melissa looked up, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. "Tell me about it?" she asked. The question held more than casual interest. It was an attempt to rebuild, to find common ground again. As Ryan began to describe the project, Melissa listened intently. She asked thoughtful questions, her analytical mind engaging with the details. They worked together to salvage breakfast, the simple act of cooking side by side feeling both foreign and achingly familiar. Over slightly burnt pancakes and strong coffee, they talked more openly than they had in years. Ryan shared his frustrations and his dreams for the community center. Melissa spoke of the pressures she felt at the hospital, the constant need to prove herself in a male-dominated field. "I never meant to make you feel less important," Melissa said, reaching across the table to touch Ryan's hand. "I got so caught up in my own world, I forgot to make space for yours." Ryan nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "And I should have spoken up sooner, instead of letting resentment build." As the morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the mess of their culinary efforts, Ryan and Melissa began the delicate process of rebuilding trust. It was a small step, but a significant one. The next few weeks brought gradual changes. Melissa made an effort to be home for dinner more often, while Ryan shared updates about the community center project. They weren't perfect. Old habits died hard, and there were moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But there was also a renewed sense of commitment, a willingness to try that had been missing for too long. One evening, as they sat in their home office reviewing plans for the community center, Melissa looked up from her laptop. "I've been thinking," she began, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "What if I reduced my hours at the hospital, not completely, but enough to have more balance, to be more present here?" Ryan set down his sketch pad, studying her face. "Are you sure?" he asked, knowing how much her career meant to her. "I don't want you to resent me for asking you to change." Melissa shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "You didn't ask. I'm realizing I want this. For us. For myself. I've been running so hard for so long, I forgot why I started in the first place." As they discussed the possibilities, the challenges, and the opportunities this change could bring, Ryan felt a warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't a magical fix to all their problems, but it was a start, a commitment to finding a new balance together. That night, as they prepared for bed, the atmosphere in their bedroom felt different. The tension that had become a constant companion was noticeably absent. As Melissa slipped under the covers, she reached for Ryan's hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on us." Ryan squeezed her hand in response, words unnecessary in that moment. As they drifted off to sleep, there was a sense of cautious optimism, a feeling that perhaps they were finally on the right path, together. 2 weeks after their heart-to-heart, Melissa sat in Chief of Surgery Dr. James Harrison's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their slight trembling. The familiar scent of antiseptic and coffee permeated the air, a smell she usually found comforting but now only added to her nervousness. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I need to reduce my hours," she stated, her voice firm despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I can't continue working 80-hour weeks." Dr. Harrison's bushy eyebrows shot up, his weathered face creasing with concern. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "Melissa," he began, his tone a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "You're up for department head next year. This isn't the time to step back." Melissa felt a flicker of doubt, the ingrained desire to please her mentor warring with her newfound resolve. She pushed it aside, sitting up straighter. "Actually, James, it's exactly the time." Her voice gained strength as she continued. "I'm losing something more important than a promotion. I need 3 days a week in surgery, not 5. My research team can handle the clinical trials." Harrison's frown deepened, lines etching themselves more prominently on his forehead. "The board won't like this," he warned, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the desk. "Dr. Chen would gladly take your cases. She's been pushing for more OR time." The mention of her ambitious colleague sent a spike of anxiety through Melissa. For a moment, she could see her carefully constructed career crumbling before her eyes. But then she thought of Ryan, of the tentative new connection they were building, and found her resolve strengthening. "Then let her," Melissa said, surprised by the calmness in her voice. She stood, smoothing her white coat with hands that no longer shook. "I'm not asking permission, James. I'm informing you of my decision." Harrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "I can't promise this won't affect your standing for department head," he said. "But I'll do what I can to make this work." As Melissa left the office, she felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had just potentially derailed years of careful career planning, and yet she felt lighter than she had in months. The hospital corridors seemed brighter somehow, the hurried pace of nurses and doctors less frantic. Walking out of the hospital that evening, Melissa paused at the glass doors. Through them, she could see Ryan waiting in their car, his figure illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. They had dinner plans to discuss the community center, a new routine they were both coming to cherish. For the first time in months, she felt like she was walking towards something, not away. As she slid into the passenger seat, Ryan turned to her with a smile. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice gentle, free of the resentment that had colored it for so long. Melissa took a deep breath, the scent of Ryan's cologne mingling with the new car smell. "It was challenging," she admitted. "But I did it. 3 days a week in surgery, starting next month." Ryan's smile widened, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made Melissa's heart skip. He reached over, squeezing her hand. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. As they drove home, discussing their plans for the evening, Melissa felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she felt like they were truly in it together. The January wind whipped around them, biting through their heavy coats as Ryan and Melissa stood on the empty lot that would become the community center. Snow crunched under their boots, the sound sharp in the crisp air. Their breath formed small clouds, dissipating quickly in the cold. Ryan pointed out where each section would be built, his architect's vision transforming the vacant space into a vibrant community hub. His eyes lit up as he described the plans, a passion Melissa had almost forgotten he possessed. "The medical wing will face east," he explained, gesturing to an area currently occupied by a small mountain of snow. "Natural light is crucial for recovery. We'll have floor-to-ceiling windows here, and a healing garden in this courtyard." Melissa nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We should include a children's waiting area," she suggested, her breath forming little puffs in the air. "Something engaging but calming. Maybe with those interactive light panels we saw at that conference last year." She paused, watching Ryan sketch rapidly in his notebook, his gloved hands moving with practiced ease. Despite the cold, his cheeks were flushed with excitement. "I forgot how alive you look when you're creating," she said softly, a pang of guilt mixing with admiration. Ryan looked up, a small smile playing at his lips. "It feels good to be excited about work again," he admitted, "and to share it with you." That evening, they sat in their home office, surrounded by blueprints and medical journals. The room, once a symbol of their separate lives, was slowly becoming a shared space. Melissa had spent the afternoon calling contacts about equipment donations for the medical wing, while Ryan refined the designs. They worked in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by questions or suggestions. The soft scratching of Ryan's pencil and the gentle tapping of Melissa's keyboard created a soothing rhythm. Outside, snow fell gently, muffling the sounds of the city. As midnight approached, Melissa looked up from her laptop to find Ryan asleep on the couch, his sketchbook open on his chest. A detailed drawing of the medical wing's reception area was visible, complete with notes in his precise handwriting. In the margin, he'd sketched a small figure in surgical scrubs. Her, she realized with a start. Moving quietly, she draped a blanket over him, taking a moment to study his face. The lines of stress that had become so prominent over the past year seemed softer in sleep. She resisted the urge to wake him, to share the rush of emotion she felt at this simple evidence of his thoughtfulness. Instead, she returned to her desk, determined to finish her proposal for a volunteer program at the center. As she worked, she found herself glancing often at Ryan's sleeping form, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. Progress was slow, but they were finding their way back to each other, one small victory at a time. The community center was becoming more than just a building project. It was the bridge they were using to reconnect, to rebuild the partnership they had nearly lost. As Melissa finally closed her laptop and prepared to wake Ryan to go to bed, she felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. There were still challenges ahead. Her reduced hours at the hospital were causing ripples, and the community center faced numerous hurdles. But for the first time in a long time, she felt equipped to face them. Not alone, but with Ryan by her side, as true partners once again. She gently shook Ryan awake, smiling as he blinked sleepily at her. "Come on, architect," she said softly. "Let's go to bed. We've got a big day tomorrow." As they walked hand in hand to their bedroom, Melissa felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were building more than a community center. They were rebuilding their life together, one day at a time. March arrived with a crispness in the air, hinting at the coming spring. The bare trees lining the streets of Toronto were just beginning to show the first buds of new life. Inside his office at the architecture firm, Ryan sat at his desk, staring at an email that threatened to derail everything they had worked for over the past months. The city's zoning board had raised concerns about the community center's parking allocation. Without their approval, construction couldn't begin. Ryan felt a knot forming in his stomach as he read through the lengthy list of objections and requirements. The setback could delay the project by months, if not derail it entirely. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair in frustration. The office around him buzzed with activity. The clacking of keyboards, the murmur of phone conversations, the whir of printers. But Ryan felt isolated in his worry. His gaze drifted to the framed photo on his desk, a recent snapshot of him and Melissa at the project site, both smiling broadly. They had come so far in rebuilding their relationship, with the community center serving as a tangible symbol of their renewed partnership. The thought of it all falling apart made his chest tighten with anxiety. His phone buzzed. Melissa. For a moment, he hesitated, old habits making him reluctant to burden her with his problems. But they had promised each other. No more walls. Taking a deep breath, he answered. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hi there," Melissa replied, her tone warm. "Just checking in. How's your day going?" Ryan closed his eyes, steeling himself. "Not great," he admitted. "The project might be delayed. Months of work, and it could all fall apart because of parking spaces." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, the reality of the situation hitting him anew. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Ryan braced himself for disappointment or disinterest. Instead, Melissa's voice came through, clear and determined. "I'm canceling my afternoon appointments," she said firmly. "Send me the zoning requirements. I know people on the board from my hospital work." Relief washed over Ryan, followed quickly by a wave of gratitude. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I know you have that important meeting with the research team." "It can wait," Melissa assured him. "This is important to us. We're in this together, remember?" By evening, they sat at their dining room table, takeout containers pushed aside, surrounded by documents. The warm glow of the overhead light cast long shadows as they pored over zoning laws and city regulations. Melissa's political savvy combined with Ryan's technical knowledge as they drafted appeals and alternative proposals. When Ryan's eyes grew tired from staring at small print, Melissa wordlessly brought him coffee, her hand lingering on his shoulder in a gesture of support. When Melissa's back ached from hunching over papers, Ryan paused their work to massage her shoulders, his strong hands working out the knots of tension. As the night wore on, their teamwork took on a rhythm, reminiscent of their early days together. They bounced ideas off each other, challenged assumptions, and found creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration and disagreement. But underlying it all was a sense of unity, of facing the challenge together. In the early hours of the morning, as they finalized their proposal, Ryan looked up to find Melissa smiling at him, her eyes tired but bright. "What?" he asked, a smile tugging at his own lips. "Nothing," she said, shaking her head slightly. I've missed this. Us, working together like this." Ryan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Me too," he said softly. "Thank you for being here, for jumping in without hesitation." Melissa squeezed his hand. "Always," she replied. "We're partners, in everything. I'm sorry I forgot that for a while." As they cleaned up the dining room, both exhausted but satisfied with their work, Ryan felt a renewed sense of hope. The zoning issue was far from resolved, but facing it together had strengthened their bond in a way he hadn't anticipated. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them as a team. The morning of the zoning board meeting dawned clear and cool, the April sun casting long shadows across Toronto's streets. Ryan stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. The weight of the day ahead pressed down on him, making each breath feel labored. "Here, let me," Melissa said softly, appearing behind him. Her gentle hands took over, smoothing his collar and straightening the knot with practiced ease. Their eyes met in the mirror, a world of unspoken support passing between them. "You've got this," she assured him, her voice steady and confident. "We've prepared for every possible question. The proposal is solid." Ryan nodded, drawing strength from her certainty. "I just wish you could be there for the whole thing," he admitted. Melissa's reflection smiled ruefully. "I know, but I'll be there as soon as I can. This surgery is important," Ryan finished for her. "I understand, really." And he did. The past few months had taught him to appreciate the delicate balance they were both striving for. The zoning board meeting was held in a sterile conference room at City Hall, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the proceedings. Ryan stood at the podium, acutely aware of the eyes of the board members upon him. He took a deep breath, channeling the confidence Melissa had instilled in him that morning. "The community center will serve as a vital hub for our neighborhood," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Our revised plans address all parking concerns while maintaining the integrity of our vision." As he clicked through his presentation, Ryan felt a sense of pride welling up inside him. This wasn't just a building. It was a manifestation of everything he and Melissa had worked to rebuild in their relationship. Each slide represented hours of collaboration, of rediscovering the synergy that had first brought them together. "The medical wing will serve an estimated 5,000 underprivileged patients annually," he explained, gesturing to a detailed floor plan. "Dr. Thompson has secured partnerships with 4 major hospitals to provide rotating specialists." A board member leaned forward, her glasses glinting in the fluorescent light. "Dr. Thompson? Any relation?" Ryan allowed himself a small smile. "My wife," he replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "She's been instrumental in developing the medical services plan." The board members exchanged glances, a ripple of interest passing through the room. They knew Melissa's reputation in the medical community. Ryan could see a shift in their body language, a new attentiveness, a growing engagement with the proposal. As if on cue, the door at the back of the room opened quietly. Ryan's heart leapt as Melissa slipped in, still wearing her surgical scrubs under a hastily donned blazer. Their eyes met across the room, and he felt a surge of confidence. "Dr. Thompson," he said, gesturing towards her. "Would you like to address the board regarding the medical programs?" Melissa moved to the front of the room with easy grace, her presence commanding attention. As she began to speak, outlining their vision for accessible healthcare and community outreach, Ryan watched with a mixture of pride and awe. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, passionate, articulate, and fully invested in making a difference. The board members leaned in, captivated by Melissa's expertise and enthusiasm. She fielded their questions with confidence, her responses showcasing the depth of thought and planning that had gone into every aspect of the medical wing. As the meeting drew to a close, Ryan could sense a shift in the room. The skepticism that had greeted him earlier had given way to genuine interest and support. When the board chairman called for a vote, the approval was unanimous. Outside the conference room, in the bustling hallway of City Hall, Ryan and Melissa stood for a moment in stunned silence. Then, with a shared laugh of relief and joy, they embraced, heedless of the curious glances from passers-by. "We did it," Ryan murmured into Melissa's hair, inhaling the faint scent of hospital antiseptic mixed with her perfume. Melissa pulled back slightly, her eyes shining. "We did," she agreed. "Together." As they walked hand in hand out of City Hall, into the bright spring sunshine, Ryan felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. The community center would become a reality. But more importantly, he and Melissa had rediscovered their strength as a team. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them united, their bond stronger than ever. The summer heat shimmered off the construction site, creating mirages on the horizon. Ryan and Melissa picked their way carefully through the organized chaos, dodging piles of materials and navigating around heavy machinery. The rhythmic pounding of hammers and the whine of power tools filled the air, a symphony of progress. Steel beams reached toward the sky, outlining the skeleton of what would soon be the community center. Concrete foundations traced the outline of their shared dream, no longer just lines on paper but a tangible reality taking shape before their eyes. Ryan's face was etched with concentration as he consulted the blueprints in his hands, comparing them to the emerging structure. Melissa watched him, marveling at the transformation she'd witnessed over the past months. The defeated slump of his shoulders was gone, replaced by a confident posture that spoke of renewed purpose. "The pediatric waiting room will be here," Ryan said, pointing to a large space currently filled with stacks of drywall and coils of wiring. His eyes lit up with excitement as he continued. "Those interactive light panels you suggested? The manufacturer was so impressed with our proposal that they decided to donate them. They'll be installed next month." Melissa squeezed his hand, a surge of pride and affection washing over her. "Remember when you used to sketch buildings on napkins?" she asked, her voice soft with nostalgia. Ryan turned to her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And you'd plan where the medical clinics would go," he finished, pulling her close despite the heat. A construction worker called out a greeting, used to seeing them on their weekly walkthroughs. As they continued their tour, Melissa found herself increasingly drawn into the technical aspects of the build. She asked questions about load-bearing walls and energy-efficient systems, her analytical mind engaging with the project in a way she hadn't before. Ryan answered each query with patience and enthusiasm, clearly thrilled by her interest. For her part, Melissa shared her latest ideas for community health initiatives, her hands gesturing animatedly as she outlined programs for preventative care and health education. Ryan listened intently, offering suggestions on how to integrate these initiatives into the center's design. Their conversation flowed seamlessly from construction timelines to medical equipment, from architectural innovations to healthcare policies. It was a dance of ideas, each partner anticipating and complementing the other's thoughts. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the site, they reluctantly prepared to leave. Walking back to their car, hands intertwined, both were struck by how natural it felt to be working side by side again. That evening, they hosted a small dinner party, their first in over a year. The house buzzed with the warm chatter of friends and the clinking of wine glasses. As Ryan manned the grill on the patio, expertly flipping steaks, Melissa moved through the kitchen, tossing salad and arranging appetizers. Their guests couldn't help but notice the change. The tension that had previously filled their home was gone, replaced by an easy synchronicity. Ryan and Melissa moved around each other with the graceful coordination of longtime dance partners, anticipating each other's needs without a word. "You two seem different," observed Sarah, one of Melissa's colleagues from the hospital. "Happier." Melissa paused in her task of refilling wine glasses, catching Ryan's eye through the patio doors. He winked at her, a private smile passing between them. "We are," she replied simply. "We've remembered how to be partners in everything." Later, after their friends had left and the dishes were done, they sat on their back deck, sharing the last of the wine. The night air was cool and fragrant with blooming jasmine from their garden. Crickets chirped softly in the background, nature's lullaby. "We're building more than a community center," Melissa said softly, looking at the stars twinkling above. "We're building us again." Ryan nodded, understanding completely. He reached out, taking her hand in his. It hasn't been easy, he acknowledged. There have been setbacks, disagreements. But we're facing them together now, Melissa finished. As a team. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in thought. The past year had been a journey of rediscovery, of learning to communicate and compromise, of remembering why they had fallen in love in the first place. You know, Ryan said eventually, his voice thoughtful, I think we needed this project. Not just for the community, but for us. It gave us a common goal, something to work towards together. Melissa hummed in agreement. It forced us out of our separate worlds, she added, made us remember how good we are together. As they prepared for bed that night, there was a palpable sense of contentment in the air. They were finding their balance, one brick at a time, building not just a community center, but a stronger foundation for their life together. As December rolled around again, the community center neared completion. A light dusting of snow covered the newly installed solar panels, and holiday lights twinkled in the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main entrance. The transformation from empty lot to vibrant community hub was nothing short of remarkable. Ryan stood in the medical wing's reception area, now finished with warm wood accents and those interactive light panels that cast soft, changing colors across the walls. He ran his hand along the smooth surface of the reception desk, marveling at how closely it matched the vision he'd had all those months ago. His phone chimed with a message from Melissa. Emergency surgery. We'll be late for the donor reception. Don't worry, I'll be there. A year ago, this message would have triggered resentment, another sign of their disconnected lives. Now, Ryan smiled, knowing she meant every word. She'd proven it repeatedly over the past year, showing up when it mattered most. The donor reception was in full swing when Melissa arrived, still in her surgical scrubs under her winter coat. She slipped in quietly during Ryan's speech, but he spotted her immediately. Their eyes met across the room, a silent communication passing between them. And speaking of saving lives, Ryan smoothly incorporated her arrival into his speech. My wife just finished doing exactly that. Dr. Thompson, would you like to tell our donors about the medical programs we'll be offering? Without missing a beat, Melissa stepped forward, her tired face lighting up as she described their vision for accessible healthcare. They'd rehearsed this handoff dozens of times, their professional partnership now as strong as their personal one. As Melissa spoke, Ryan watched her with a mixture of pride and love. Her passion for the project matched his own, her words painting a vivid picture of the impact the center would have on the community. The donors listened attentively, clearly impressed by the seamless presentation and the obvious dedication of the couple before them. After the formal presentations, Ryan and Melissa moved through the crowd together, their natural rhythm evident in the way they took turns leading conversations, building on each other's points, and sharing proud glances when someone praised the center. You two work so well together, commented one of the major donors, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes. It's clear this project is a labor of love for both of you. Ryan and Melissa exchanged a look, years of shared history and renewed connection passing between them in that glance. It is, Ryan agreed, his arm slipping naturally around Melissa's waist. In more ways than one. As the evening wound down, they found a quiet moment alone in the center's small courtyard. The space that would become a healing garden in the spring was now covered in a blanket of pristine snow, the bare branches of newly planted trees stretching toward the star-filled sky. Can you believe it's been a year? Melissa asked, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we were falling apart, and other times, it feels like we've come so far, Ryan finished, pulling her close. The warmth of her body against his was a comfort in the winter chill. We have come far, Mel. Not just with the center, but with us. Melissa nodded, snuggling deeper into his embrace. There were moments I wasn't sure we'd make it, she admitted softly. But I'm so glad we fought for this. For us. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the gentle fall of snowflakes in the glow of the courtyard lights. The sounds of the reception inside were muffled, creating a cocoon of peace around them. You know, Ryan said eventually, a hint of mischief in his voice, I hear there's talk of expanding the community center model to other neighborhoods. Think you could use an architect on your team?" Melissa laughed, the sound clear and joyful in the quiet night. "Only if he's willing to work long hours, attend boring meetings, and put up with a demanding doctor as a partner," she teased. Ryan pretended to consider, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "That's a tall order, but I think I know just the guy for the job." As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, both were struck by how far they'd come. The community center stood as a testament to their renewed partnership, a physical manifestation of their recommitment to each other and to their shared dreams. The year ahead would bring new challenges, new projects, and undoubtedly new obstacles. But as they rejoined the reception, seamlessly falling back into their roles as hosts and visionaries, there was a quiet confidence between them. Whatever came their way, they would face it together, as partners, in every sense of the word. Christmas Eve found Ryan and Melissa in their living room, surrounded by moving boxes. The decision to downsize had come naturally, a mutual realization that they needed a fresh start in a space that reflected their renewed partnership. Their new home, closer to the community center, awaited them, a symbol of the next chapter in their lives. The room was bathed in the warm glow of their Christmas tree, its lights twinkling softly against the backdrop of the snowy evening outside. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, each labeled in Ryan's precise architect's handwriting. The air was thick with nostalgia and anticipation. "I have something for you," Melissa said, her voice soft as she handed Ryan a carefully wrapped package. "I know we said we'd wait until tomorrow, but this feels like the right moment." Ryan took the gift, feeling its weight in his hands. He looked at Melissa, noting the mixture of nervousness and excitement in her eyes. Carefully, he unwrapped the present, revealing a leather-bound portfolio. As he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Inside were photographs documenting the community center's construction, from groundbreaking to completion. But mixed in were other photos, candid shots of him working late at night, presenting to contractors, and pointing out details to Melissa on their walkthroughs. She'd been quietly capturing his journey all along. "Mel, this is..." Ryan's voice trailed off, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Melissa smiled, reaching out to touch his arm. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. With slightly trembling hands, Ryan opened the envelope to find a letter from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. His eyes widened as he read. The community center had been nominated for an innovation award. "You submitted this," he realized, looking up from the detailed nomination letter she'd written. The pride and love in Melissa's eyes made his heart swell. "It was time someone noticed your little building project," she smiled, using air quotes around the words that had sparked their crisis a year ago. The phrase, once so hurtful, now held a touch of playful irony. Ryan set the portfolio and letter aside, pulling Melissa into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Not just for this, but for everything. For believing in me. In us." As they held each other, surrounded by the physical reminders of their past and the promise of their future, both felt a profound sense of gratitude. The year had brought challenges they never expected, but it had also brought them back to each other, stronger than ever. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Melissa propped herself up on one elbow, looking at Ryan thoughtfully. "You know," she began, a hint of excitement in her voice, "I've been thinking about the expansion plans for the community center model." Ryan turned to face her, intrigued. "Oh. What if we approached it differently?" Melissa continued, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Instead of just replicating the center, what if we tailored each new project to the specific needs of different neighborhoods?" As they discussed the possibilities, bouncing ideas off each other with the easy rapport they'd rediscovered, Ryan marveled at how far they'd come. A year ago, they'd barely been able to have a conversation about their days. Now, they were planning the future together, their personal and professional lives intertwined in the most fulfilling way. As Christmas morning dawned, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings, Ryan and Melissa faced it together. Partners in every sense of the word, ready for whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead. The Maple Leaf Hotel's grand ballroom looked exactly the same as it had last Christmas, but everything else had changed. This year's holiday party was a joint celebration, the hospital staff and the community center's team coming together to mark a year of collaboration and success. Ryan adjusted his bow tie, catching Melissa's eye in the mirror as she put the finishing touches on her makeup. The nervous energy that had characterized their preparation for last year's event was gone, replaced by a quiet excitement and sense of shared purpose. "Ready?" Melissa asked, reaching for his hand. Ryan nodded, lacing his fingers through hers. "Ready." They entered the ballroom together, a united front. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, the air filled with the scent of pine from the elaborate decorations and the tantalizing aroma of the gourmet buffet. As they moved through the crowd, Ryan and Melissa fell into an easy rhythm, their natural synergy evident in the way they took turns leading conversations, building on each other's points, and sharing proud glances when someone praised the center or Melissa's work at the hospital. Dr. Harrison approached them, a glass of champagne in hand. "Melissa, Ryan," he greeted them warmly. "I must say, I had my doubts when you reduced your hours, Melissa. But seeing what you've accomplished with the community center, while still maintaining your excellent work at the hospital, well, I'm impressed." Melissa smiled, squeezing Ryan's hand. "It's all about finding the right balance," she said, "and having a great partner." As the night wore on, Ryan found himself reflecting on the journey of the past year. He watched Melissa across the room, deep in conversation with a group of doctors about the center's impact on community health. Her eyes were bright with passion, her hands gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Near midnight, they slipped away to the hotel's rooftop terrace. The Toronto skyline sparkled before them, snow falling gently around them. The air was crisp and cold, their breath forming small clouds in the night air. "Remember last year?" Melissa asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "When you finally told me I was losing us?" Ryan turned to face her, cupping her face gently in his hands. "Best meltdown I ever had," he chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "We needed that wake-up call." "We did," she agreed, leaning into his touch. "Though next time, maybe we could skip the public drama." "Next time?" He raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well," Melissa said, her eyes twinkling with mischief and excitement, "I hear there's talk of expanding the community center to other neighborhoods. Think you could use a medical consultant on your team?" Ryan pulled her closer, the warmth of her body a stark contrast to the cold night air. "I think we make a pretty good team," he murmured, "in everything." As they stood there, holding each other close, the snow fell harder, their figures silhouetted against the city lights. Below them, the party continued, but they remained on the terrace, lost in the moment and the promise of their shared future. The past year had taught them the value of communication, of supporting each other's dreams while nurturing their own, of finding balance in the chaos of their busy lives. They had rediscovered the foundation of their relationship and built upon it, creating something stronger and more resilient than before. As the old year faded and a new one approached, Ryan and Melissa faced it together, not as two individuals pursuing separate paths, but as true partners, equal in their commitment to each other and to the life they were building. The challenges ahead were many, but they were ready to face them, hand in hand, step by step, together. In the distance, fireworks began to light up the sky, heralding the approach of midnight. Ryan and Melissa turned to watch, their arms around each other, hearts beating in sync. As the new year dawned, they shared a kiss that held the promise of all that was to come, a future built on rediscovered love, mutual respect, and the unshakable bond of true partnership. What did you think of the story? Please leave a comment with your opinion. 2 buttons will appear next to it, one to subscribe if you haven't already, and another to watch other exciting stories. Make your choice. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.